The holiday weekend produced a lot of lame fireworks over Senator Obama's statement on Thursday that he would continue to refine his policy on Iraq based on conditions on the ground there.
I've always said that I would listen to commanders on the ground. I've always said that the pace of withdrawal would be dictated by the safety and security of our troops and the need to maintain stability. That assessment has not changed, and when I go to Iraq and I have a chance to talk to some of the commanders on the ground, I'm sure I'll have more information and we'll continue to refine my policies.
Now, the McCain campaign is calling that a flip-flop for Senator Obama, and the media has been running and running and running and running with that story. Even though the position stated by the presumptive Democratic nominee on Thursday, which you just heard, exactly echoed what he said at the MSNBC debate in New Hampshire in September, when neither he, nor Senator Clinton, nor Senator Edwards would commit to absolutely having troops out of Iraq by 2013.
We don't know what contingency will be out there. What I can promise is that if there are still troops in Iraq when I take office, which it appears there may be unless we can get some of our Republican colleagues to change their mind and cut off funding without a timetable, if there's no timetable, then I will drastically reduce our presence there to the mission of protecting our embassy, protecting our civilians, and making sure that we're carrying out counterterrorism activities there. I believe that we should have all our troops out by 2013, but I don't want to make promises not knowing what the situation is going to be 3 or 4 years out.
Essentially exactly what he said this past Thursday. But wait, there's more. Senator Obama also told Steve Kroft in an interview with 60 Minutes in February that he would not pull out of Iraq according to a timetable, regardless of the situation. Quote, "I always reserve, as Commander-in-Chief, the right to assess the situation," end quote. Lots to talk about with Richard Wolffe, senior White House correspondent for Newsweek magazine. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Rachel.
You were at Thursday's Obama news conference. You even asked the question about Iraq. So let me ask you now, what is not working here for Senator Obama? Plenty of videotape exists of him being consistent in his statements on Iraq. Then he explains and re-explains those positions and the consistency. But the McCain campaign charges flip-flop, and the news cycle was set for the entire holiday weekend. To borrow from another frequent countdown guest, E.J. Dionne of the Washington Post on this, when a candidate has to call a second news conference to say the same thing he thought he said at the first news conference, does that candidate have a problem?
Yeah, I guess I've got to admit 2 rounds of guilt. First of all, for asking the question in the first place, and secondly, because I didn't actually think his response was any different from anything he said for the last 18 months. Of course, the tone is slightly different here, now that he's trying to appear all sort of pseudo-presidential, but the substance of it is just what he said in those debates, in Cleveland, in that debate. Even when he announced his position on Iraq and the 16-month timetable, he talked about having to move troops out of the more stable areas and maybe leaving them in the more volatile areas at the early stages. So this has always been caveats out there that other candidates and debate moderators have gone after him for. I actually thought the only real flip-flop last Thursday was the reversal on his long-held position of holding 1 press conference a day. He had 2.
Well, how did he get stuck then with 4 days, essentially, of the flip-flop story? How did he get stuck with that if it wasn't actually a flip-flop, and how does he begin to fix it now?
Well, I think there are 2 narratives that are being put out there. One has been propagated by the Republican Party and the McCain campaign, which is essentially to run this as if it's 2004 again. So the flip-flop charge worked in 2004 with John Kerry. It must work again with Barack Obama. That's the thinking. And in fact, we saw this play out in 2006 when Kerry had a botched joke and everyone said, oh no, it's 2004 again. And times have changed. The politics have changed. So that's one issue. The second thing is that the media has globbed onto a narrative that this is a candidate who's moving to the center, and he certainly has tacked away on his position on FISA, but actually, again, not just on Iraq, but also on things like the death penalty for rapists of children. These are positions he's held all along, but people have tuned them out, whether they didn't hear them in the first place or they chose to set them aside. So, you know, there's a lot of sloppy reporting going on.
And the one thing that has surprised me in this whole discussion was Senator Obama saying yesterday that he was surprised by the media response, essentially surprised by the sloppy reporting. Do you think he's making the same mistake that other Democrats have made in giving the mainstream media, at least giving TV, too much credit, assuming that they will do the minimum research, assuming that nuance can and will be processed? Does he need to make it easier for people to process the facts about him?
Yeah, I don't even think it's just TV here, but clearly there is a lack of institutional memory, to put it mildly. You've got a number of new reporters coming into the campaign at this point, people who didn't cover him throughout the primaries and maybe have a caricature of what his positions were. And certainly the campaign could be much more aggressive and upfront about restating those positions as opposed to just putting the candidate out there and doing it for himself.
Would also help everybody, I guess, just to have a reminder that just because a candidate's opponent says something is true about that candidate doesn't necessarily mean you should lead with it, right?
Quite right.
Richard Wolffe of Newsweek and MSNBC, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Rachel.